very much. Lovely to be here today in what is really wonderful surroundings. Slightly more nervous to follow what was a very interesting and clearly very funny talk. My talk has got no jokes in, so I'm sorry, but I'll try and fill it with information instead. So I'm going to talk about biodiversity net gain, and in particular offsite biodiversity net gain. Show of hands in the room. Who is familiar with what offset biodiversity net gain is? Okay, that's pretty good. You're one of the best audiences I've spoken to about this end. Right, so let me tell you a little bit about this before we get into the research project that we're doing on it. And it's really pertinent that the last paper was talking about the ability of developer-led research, because this is a research project that is led by Oxford Archaeology and funded by Historic England. So we're really pushing forward, like right at the front of this kind of topic at the moment. So biodiversity net gain is a requirement which came in from February 2024. So developments, at the moment it's development of a certain size, so small and medium size. It's going to be implemented to larger scale, so national infrastructure projects soon. The idea is that as part of the development, you have to deliver a 10% biodiversity uplift. So before the development occurs, a biodiversity survey is done on your land, and then you have to provide a clear plan of how you are going to do your development and produce a 10% uplift in your biodiversity on that site. If you can't deliver that biodiversity uplift, what you can do is you can actually offset that biodiversity reduction within your red line on another site. So this is known as offsite BNG, where you can have an offsite site where you manage for biodiversity to offset the loss on your development site, or you can actually, somebody else can own that land and they can manage that land for biodiversity, and then you as a developer can come in and you can buy biodiversity credits or units which offsets the destruction that has occurred on within your red line. So the important thing here is that biodiversity net gain at the moment is driving new habitat creation projects all over the UK, because that is creating the market for developers to then go and buy their BNG units to offset the biodiversity that they're destroying in their developments. So in order to do this, in order to have a site that then can be available for people to come and buy your biodiversity unit, so you're a landowner, you've managed your land for species-rich grassland, you've got a number of units available to buy. You need to get that registered on the Biodiversity Gains Register, which is run by DEFRA and the government, and then a landowner can come and buy those units off you through that register. In order to do that, you have to enter into a legal agreement with either a local authority or a responsible body who are approved by the government, that you will engage in a 30-year plan of managing this habitat. So you are legally required to manage your habitat according to your habitat plan for 30 years to deliver this biodiversity uplift, and then developers can come and buy this off you. All sounds really good. Unfortunately, for off-site biodiversity net gain developments, there is no legal requirement to consider the historic environment outside of designated assets that already have legal protection, scheduled monuments, things like that. So our question is, how is habitat creation practices such as BNG, how is this affecting the historic environment? And is this a problem for us? Is it actually an opportunity for us, or is it a bit of both? And so we started this project towards the end of last year, funded by Historic England. We're working with a number of stakeholders, which you can see there on the screen. And we're trying to understand two real things. We're trying to understand what the current practice is for offsite BNG and how the historic environment is or isn't being incorporated into it. And we're also trying to understand looking more internally within us as a sector, how well we actually understand how habitat creation practices might impact the historic environment. Do we really know well enough in order to start advising other people. So part of my job has been finding all of the available resources and research out there that talks about the habitat creation practice and the historic environment in all weird and wonderful forms. There are some truly obscure things out there which will be all part of our outputs at the end of the project. So the offsite BNG process looks a bit like this, and this is something that we've been really trying to get a handle on exactly how this works. But an offsite BNG project begins potentially with a very wide range of stakeholders. These could be landowners wanting to manage their land for BNG. It could be land managers or land brokers who are interested in getting people to commit their land to a BNG project. We may have consultant ecologists who are designing their BNG habitat management plans. There could be landscape architects. There could be the developers themselves wanting to get off-site sites to develop for BNG. There could be historic environment professionals, but we don't know. But what happens is that all of these different stakeholders could come together to design an off-site BNG plan. This then gets submitted to somebody that can officially and legally approve it. So that is either a local authority or a approved responsible body. And so this plan goes to them and then it is approved. And ultimately, when it's approved, the landowner who's going to be doing the habitat management enters into either a Section 106 legal agreement or a conservation covenant, both of which legally bind you to do your habitat management for 30 years. But the question for me and for our project team is, when that plan gets approved at either the responsible body or the local authority level, are there any historic environment professionals involved in approving the plan? So the question is, us as a sector, are we involved in designing these plans? Are we involved in approving these plans? So what we did was, part of the project is that we've undertaken a wide questionnaire to a wide range of BNG stakeholders. So they are both people involved in the reviewing and approval of off-site BNG practices and people who are involved in the design of BNG off-site projects. And again, the lists of those stakeholders or institutions through which we've engaged with stakeholders are up there on the slide. And from this questionnaire, we had over 160 responses. So we feel we've got a relatively good picture of how people are going about this process at the moment. So what I first wanted to do was actually share with you some of our initial results to show you how things are going since BNG was officially statutorily introduced last year. So when we're looking at people designing off-site BNG projects, so that's when they're considering creating these habitat plans, we asked, what are historic environment professionals involved in your design plans? And here you can see 65% of responders who were involved in the design of off-site BNG plans said no. There was absolutely no involvement by any historic environment professionals. So these are landowners, land managers, ecologists, people like that, designing these plans without any consultation with historic environment specialists. And what we're seeing here as well is that they have to consider designated assets. They're doing this through things like Shine, open access data, where they can look at it and go, okay, there's nothing here that's a problem, right, let's move on. But obviously that means that they're only considering certain types of assets, and they're thinking about identified assets, not the potential for unidentified assets as well. So there's lots of complexity going on, which if you haven't got a historic environment specialist in your project, you might not appreciate. And then, unsurprisingly, if you haven't got a historic environment specialist in your project, when we ask the question, to what degree are you considering the historic environment within your project design, we can see here that 61% of responders said that the historic environment was rarely or never considered in the off-site BNG projects that they were designing, and though only 8% of responders said the historic environment was always considered. So That's unsurprising given the last slide. Also, it's unsurprising given the fact that there is no legislative legal requirement to do any kind of deep consideration of the historic environment. People are not doing this. The BNG is a market. People are trying to make money out of this. Landowners are trying to make money out of this. So if it's not a legislated requirement, it is an extra time, it is an extra cost. So people are simply not doing it. That's if they know to do it at all. And I'll come back to that in a second. And then we get to when offsite BNG projects are being approved. So this is either by local authorities or by your responsible bodies. So this is when they get signed off and they enter into the legal agreement. You can see here that only 30% of the responders involved in these processes said that there was any involvement of historic environment professionals in that approval process. So that's either things like historic environment officers in local authorities. It's less clear where responsible bodies are getting their historic environment advice from, if they're getting it at all. And then when we specifically asked people, historic environment specialists working in mainly local authorities, there were one or two scattered in responsible bodies, and we said, do you feel like you're being adequately incorporated into the review process? You can see there 63% of the historic environment professionals said that they felt that they weren't adequately included. And there's a wide range of reasons for this, including the structure of local authorities, silo working, conceptual divisions between the natural and the historic environment, people being based in different departments, different councils. It's really complicated and really difficult. And what I'm not here to do is to say, this is terrible and it's all their fault. There's lots and lots of really difficult things going on that make these considerations, which again are not legally required, it makes them very difficult to do. And then we asked people about guidance, about, do you know, if you're going to go and undertake an offsite BNG project, do you know of any guidance that tells you that you should think about the historic environment when you're doing your design proposal? And if it says you should, where to go to get help? How to think about incorporating the historic environment to habitat creation practices. And yep, 90% of people said, nope, I don't know of any. I don't know of any resources at all. So that is a clear, that is the other side of the coin here, that people aren't including the historic environment, but that's because they don't know of any guidance. And I've been through all of the available guidance that I could find over the past few months, and this is a reality. There really is no guidance on how to go about doing this. So I want to, that's the state of play at the moment. So we're seeing that historic environment specialists are involved, are rarely involved in the reviewing or design. As a result, the historic environment is rarely included in these projects. This both reflects that it's not a legal requirement, but it also reflects the fact that people don't know that this is something they should be doing for a variety of reasons. A lack of guidance, a lack of legislation, a lack of resources, a lack of cross-working between people working in different sectors, natural and historic environment. So it's quite complicated, but ultimately it means we're not being included, or we're not including ourselves to the degree that maybe we should do. And it's worth thinking about this with an eye on things that are going on at the moment and are coming down the line very soon. So we know the Planning Infrastructure Bill is going through, I think it's second reading in the House of Lords at the moment. Now, the Planning Infrastructure Bill, as far as we understand at the moment, is not going to affect BNG. Planning Infrastructure Bill, when it's talking about natural environment, its impact is mainly on how we deal with species. BNG is about habitats. So these are two different things. But there are little things in the Planning and Infrastructure Bill that we should be keeping an eye on, such as an amendment that was placed in to suggest that pond creation under 0.2 of a hectare in size should be allowed under permissive development, i.e. needs no planning permission, so people can just go and dig ponds wherever they like. Okay, which is something that we should, it's important for nature recovery, but it is also important that it could have an impact on the historic environment. So we need to keep an eye on things like that. There is currently 2 consultations on BNG being introduced. One for nationally significant infrastructure projects, so right on the highest level, the big stuff. And there is also a second consultation about minor, medium and brownfield development sites. And these are going to be open until the end of July. And so there is an opportunity here for us to actually start to raise our voices and say, it would be great if the historic environment was incorporated into these processes in more detail, because at the moment it's unclear how they're being included and what potential problems they might be creating. And the backdrop to all of this is, as BNG gets added to more sizes of development, it is likely that the BNG market is going to expand. More people are going to be doing these habitat creation schemes. So if the historic environment isn't included in that, the potential in terms of scale for impact just grows, right, as more of these sites get produced. So we need to think about how we fit into all of this. And I think nature recovery, both in terms of BNG and other things, could be an increasing area of business and work for our sector. We're seeing it already in things like landscape recovery projects, where there are new, so HIOSAs there, everybody loves a good acronym, so HIOSAs, Heritage Impact and Opportunity Scoping Assessments. Been learning that on the train. We've done a few of these so far. Now these are really interesting because this is people doing landscape recovery projects where, as part of the funding they're getting to do these projects, they are required to consider the historic environment, not just in terms of the impact the nature recovery might have on the historic environment, but also the opportunities that the historic environment provides to deliver positive contributions to nature recovery. So I think this is what we should start to be thinking about. We would also, if BNG expands, I think also we can think about more BNG, more habitat creation. If we can make ourselves more prominent in the kind of things we can contribute to nature recovery, we may also be able to see further opportunities for engaging, doing archaeological work that contributes to these habitat creation schemes. We are in a bit of a bind because obviously at the moment for things like BNG, it's not a legal requirement. So what we can't do is make the historic environment appear to be an obstacle to nature recovery, because it looks very bad for us and people will just ignore us. But also, nature recovery is a really important thing, right? It's one of the really big narratives at the moment. So we also shouldn't be looking to get in the way of it. We should be looking for a way that we can find clever and innovative ways that we can become incorporated with nature recovery, so we can contribute, so we're not obstacles. So ultimately, these projects go forward, the historic environment is protected, and we're also doing good things for the wider debate around nature recovery. So to do that, we need to start thinking about how we can instill ourselves, how we can think differently about what the historic environment can do in relation to nature recovery. And so this is part of what we're doing in our research project. So we want to first try and understand what impacts habitat creation can actually have on historic environment assets. Sometimes we know quite well that certain types of habitats are particularly damaging for assets types. So knowledge of things like tree roots, drainage of wetlands, the introduction of bracken onto earthworks. These have got quite a lot of research around them and show that they are quite detrimental to buried remains. So we know that these are issues. We also know that some habitats actually confer some positives to historic environment assets. So arable reversion, the production of species-rich grasslands, taking sort of earthworks and buried assets out of the plough and into grassland protects them under these things. So these are good things. A recent report done by Oxford Archaeology with the Forestry Commission looking at tree roots has identified that tree roots can damage, but can also protect and consolidate features as well. It's not as simple as one habit creates one impact to everything. We need to become more aware of what can and can't happen. We need to be more aware of the subtleties, which will stop the archaeology being an obstacle, and we can find better ways to incorporate the two together. So nature and historic environment aims being combined together. There are, though, existing knowledge gaps. There is an issue about accessible guidance. A lot of this guidance is available through Historic England, but some of the research is obscure journals. Like some of the stuff that I've been looking at was located in a Swiss ecological journal, which I only have access to because I have a university account. So nobody else can. And if you're doing a BNG project and you're not an archaeologist, why would you be looking at that at all, right? So we need to do a better job of getting things together to get this in people's eye line to show that we are relevant and that we can help. There's also a lot of practitioner knowledge out there, things that people know that are in their heads which are not written down and therefore are not accessible. So that's the other thing. We need to, as a group, come together to collate everybody's vast library of knowledge to best equip all of us to make these decisions and to go about this stuff. Because actually, the historic environment produces a set of really interesting opportunities for nature recovery. And I see it as being broken down really into three main things. So the first is that we know that the historic environment has an incredible archive of paleo-environmental information that allows us to reconstruct environments over centuries and millennia. If we are looking at creating resilient landscapes in particular places for the future, the past can help us do that. It can show where particular plants have been successful, where particular communities have been successful, and it can show how those communities have changed over time across different climate fluctuations in the past, which may be able to help build a more resilient habitat in the future. This is one of our superpowers, which I speak to ecologists all the time, and they go, "Oh, really? You can do that? Oh, that's exciting." We should be shouting this from the rooftops, that this is one service that we can provide to help them. The second is we need to develop our understanding of what asset types offer what kind of habitat opportunities. So we can't just do the avoidance. Like we can't say, well, there's stuff here, so you can't do anything here, because that will ultimately, if there are enough assets that you're saying you have to avoid, that will mean that whole nature recovery schemes will just say, well, this is unfeasible because too much of our land is now unavailable. So we need more research and more understanding to allow us to figure out what habitat types can be placed in and around what kinds of assets. So an example of this is we can think about built structures and the ability to foster plant communities on built structures. I've had conversations with people in my interviews and my questionnaires with this, and I said if people were saying, oh, I want to create plant communities on built structures, what would you say? And most people say, oh no, don't do that. That's really bad. However, the historic environment guidance, which is supported by Natural England research, gives a clear list of a number of species which create no damage to structures, right? So there is a difference between practitioner knowledge and the available evidence. So we need to get on board with this same stuff. And then finally, I think the historic environment can provide a really important setting for outreach and engagement. We know that, you know, we've already heard one of our powers is our outreach and engagement. The fact that, you know, you don't meet a person that isn't interested in the historic environment. I think people sometimes get really stuck with this kind of climate change fatigue, this feeling of like impending unstoppable doom. And so when you want to talk to them about climate change and nature recovery, sometimes people just kind of glaze over because it's all too much to think about, and I completely understand that. The historic environment offers a new way into talking about changes in climate, adaptations in climate, the way people have lived with landscapes and environments over time, and how just as we've changed in the past, we can change in the future. And they're not just like grand narratives, it's based in evidence and data and research, and that's stuff that we can show. So ultimately, going forward, and this is a mixture of the things that we do every day as archaeologists, the things that we do in research, the things we do with different projects trying to push this forward, the guidance we produce, the assistance for non-historic environment specialists. We all need to think about how we can be more involved in this in a positive way, and then we need to demonstrate that our inclusion is a positive one. Again, as you said, if people don't think it's interesting, whose fault is that, right? And if people don't think that we're capable of contributing positively to nature recovery, whose fault is that? We can shout louder about this, I think. So that is, I think, all incredibly exciting future strands for us to follow up on here. So I'm going to leave it on a positive note and stop.